Tel Aviv 360, Israel's largest and most diverse podcast.
Hello, welcome to Tau Unbound, and I'm Tamar Herzig from Tel Aviv University's Department of History. And it is my great pleasure to welcome the filmmaker Fred Kudjo Kuwornu to Tel Aviv University. Welcome, Fred.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Toda.
It is great to have you here. Fred is visiting Tel Aviv University for a few days for several events related to his recently produced film, We Were Here, The Lives of Black Africans in Renaissance Europe. The film will be screened at Tel Aviv University on June 11th, and in Tatarbut Feitlovich, the Center for Ethiopian Art, on June 12th, and at the Tel Aviv Museum of Art on June 13th. In addition, this Tuesday, another film, an earlier film by Fred, Blaxploitalian, will be screened at Tatarbut Feitlovich at the Center for Ethiopian Art. So we are very excited to have you here, and Fred is visiting Israel as a guest of the project FemSMed, Female Slavery in Mediterranean Catholic Europe, 1500 to 1800. It's a project funded by the European Research Council, and it gives us the opportunity to welcome Fred to Tel Aviv, also as a recent winner of the Dan David Prize in the study of the human past, a great honor. And but Fred, is this your first time in Israel?
Actually, it's not my first time. It's my second time, but it's my first time that I'm here also to show my work. So my first time was 3 years ago, and I came just for a travel of 8 days. And I remember very well that when I back to, actually I'm living in the United States, so from Tel Aviv I went back to New York, and I always wanted to come back here, also to visit much more the country and to stay also in different city, because unfortunately the first time that I came here, it was supposed to stay 6 days in Jerusalem and 2 days in Tel Aviv. But since the first hour that I landed in Tel Aviv, I say, no, I want to stay here. So pardon, friends from Jerusalem. Of course, I went to see Jerusalem. Maybe next time I will have more time, but I was really captured by the atmosphere in Tel Aviv. So at the time, I remember that I was wondering, maybe, I don't know, maybe I would like to come one day for work.
And we're very glad that this became possible. You mentioned that you live in the U.S., but tell us a little bit about yourself. You are from Italy. What is your background, and how is it related to the kinds of films that you are producing, including the one that we will be focusing on in a few minutes?
Sure. My background in few minutes, even sometimes it's difficult also for me to understand the trajectory of my life and identity, because I'm constantly moving in different places. But I was born and raised in Italy in the 70s, and I lived in Italy until 14 years ago, so basically in different cities. I came from a multiracial family. My mom is Italian and Jewish, born in Bologna many years ago, of course, before me. And my dad is from Ghana, West Africa. He came to Italy in 1965 to study medicine. And technically, I grew up in a small city, in two small cities. One is Bologna, the other is Ferrara. And I lived 8 years in Rome, where I worked for the public television and other jobs. And in 2012, I moved to the United States. I start technically there my real career of documentary filmmaker, and I experiences in many other jobs and tasks and different things. And since maybe a couple of years, I'm really nomadic because even, of course, my base is New York. I'm living between Europe, Brazil, Ghana. So I try to work remotely from different parts of the world, and in particular from this part of the world where I could be interested to tell some story in terms of documentary or product that are connected to documentary films.
So I will mention just your recent films, your four most recent films. So the first major documentary that you produced, Inside Buffalo, They Served America When America Was Not Ready to Serve Them, from 2010, which tells the story of a segregated unit of African Americans who and the role that they played in liberating Italy from Nazi occupation during the Second World War. Also a film that won major awards and recognition. Then in 2012, you produced 18 Jus Soli, The Right to be Italian, about the problems with the immigration law and how it affects second-generation immigrants, so who were actually born in Italy and yet are not entitled to automatically become citizens. And this film also features on the UN website, on the webpage on immigration, and has also attracted much public attention. The penultimate film from 2016 is Blaxploitalian, 100 Years of Blackness in Italian Cinema, and this will be screened, followed by a conversation with you.
Thank you. You pronounce right, because every time that someone tries to pronounce the title of this film, say Blaxploitation.
Yes, or it is clear that also Blaxploitation lurks in the background, but yes. So now I will surely say it wrong. Blaxploitalian, which will be screened at the Center for Ethiopian Art at the Beit Feitlovich on this Tuesday. This will be the first time it will be screened in Israel. And your most recent film, which is why you are here, why we invited you here as part of the FemSMed project, is We Were Here, The Untold History of Black Africans in Renaissance Europe. It came out in 2024, and you were invited to actually show it in the Biennale of Venice, another great recognition just this last fall. So my first question to you would be, who were the Black Africans in Renaissance Europe?
Yeah, first of all, I was, my idea to do this film came thanking a lot of works made by a lot of scholars, maybe like you also. By the way, scholars of early modern history, Renaissance, art historians. There are several publications, but also sometimes exhibition and work on this topic, and part of my work, since I made Inside Buffalo, sometimes is in one sense to translate historical studies made by scholars into something that can be shareable, not for the blockbuster industry, but for the community. So also using a lot the technique of the interviews, and sometimes when it's possible for budget reason, the reenactment scene. The Africans who were in the 15th century in Europe, and in particular the documentary is more focused on Southern Europe. Also because the Renaissance art, by the way, was exploding in Southern Europe, where the money was at the time.
We should explain maybe to our audience that when we talk about the Renaissance, broadly speaking, we are thinking from 1400 to maybe 1600. But I think the chronological trajectory in the film focuses especially on the 1500s and 1600s mostly.
Mostly for a couple of reasons, because we needed also to reconstruct. How can I say? Of course, Africans was always in particular in Southern Europe, maybe probably since the ancient Greek and the Roman Empire. But we wanted also to reconstruct something that was also the presence of the Mediterranean slave trade into Europe from Africa, of course, not from Eastern Europe. So we needed to be focused in this time of the history for this reason, because we needed also to find a way to explain not only to Europeans but also to non-Europeans a time of Europe in which the borders between the social construct of racism and the freedom of other people and maybe the anarchy in terms of passport or was totally different. So for this reason, this is a real precious time when we are going or approach the 17th century. Everything changed in terms of races, relations, ethnicities, and so for me it was important to be focused on Renaissance for three reasons. One, we wanted to show not only those who were servants, because this was also a huge time about geopolitical relations between some kingdoms that were really relevant, for example, Portugal and Spain, another kingdom of Africa like Ethiopia or the kingdom of Congo and Angola. So we wanted also to show how many sometimes diplomats, ambassadors, merchants were interacting into those societies. The second reason was there is an abundant presence of paintings, art, monuments, so documents, visual documents about this presence. And the third reason to do this work was also the idea to challenge this common idea that Africans came into Europe only in the last 25 years, when we talk about, for example, Italy, so my country, or they came through the colony process in the 19th century when, for example, we are approaching France or United Kingdom. So for me, it's a really important time of history. And even maybe in Italy sometimes is underestimated. Of course, outside Italy, again, the 15th century in Europe, it's really well known for the art. So using this story and using this time of history is really relevant, I think, for every kind of topic you want to analyze, not only the African presence, but you can do everything during the Renaissance, and maybe you will attract people.
Yes, and I have to say, having watched the movie, that it is itself a work of art. It is beautiful, also from the aesthetic point of view, in addition to its importance in really bringing to light a relatively little known aspect of the European past. And you mentioned some of the countries that the film focuses on. So mostly the African presence in Spain, in Portugal, also in the different Italian states, because in this period, Italy, of course, was not unified. There were many different states, and these states were also very important for the revolutionary Renaissance art that came into being in cities such as your hometown of Ferrara. So it is maybe not surprising that you became eventually interested in the Renaissance after growing up in this setting that still preserves the heritage, the cultural heritage of the Renaissance, while at the same time, traditionally, from the historiographic point of view, ignoring the fact that this was not only an era of cultural innovations, of great flourishing in all fields of art and literature and philosophy, and also of geographic knowledge, but that this geographic knowledge was also a step in the process of European expansion and exploitation of other continents, and here Africa that you're focusing on was, of course, central to this story, and all your films really deal with the entangled histories of the different continents, either America and Europe and Africa, or in this case, Europe and Africa. And I find that very interesting. But we should also note that whereas the slave trade was a phenomenon typical of the early modern era, so the Renaissance and century that followed, the 15th and 16th and 17th century. So the slave trade was on the rise throughout this period, both in the, but when we are talking about Mediterranean slave trade and the slave trade across the Atlantic, most people, when they think about slavery, think about what happened in the Americas, in the Caribbean, and the forced migration and dislocation of Africans following their enslavement in Africa to the Americas and the Caribbean. And this is a much more well-known story than the history of the enslavement of Africans who remained in Europe as slaves. So one of the major contributions of your film is to make this aspect of the European past of having slaves and but not only slaves of African descent in the major cities of Renaissance Europe. And while you focus on Southern Europe, you do also mention African presence also in France, in England, and in the Netherlands. So it really is a film about Europe. And could you maybe tell us a little bit more about the African presence, in addition to those who arrived as slaves through the Atlantic port cities or directly from Africa to European cities? What other kinds of people arrived from Africa?
Yeah, in the documentary, we try also to tell story of people who were not only arrived, but sometimes were born by Africans. Because what it's of course clear, but it's not too clear. It's how a lot of Europeans, maybe they have ancestors who were Africans, Jewish or Arabs, and they don't know because. But the common sense is to don't think that maybe they have a family at the time or something like that. So, for example, in the documentary, there are a couple of stories that for me are really interesting. One is the story of the painter. He's a real famous Spanish painter. His name is Juan de Pareja. Sorry for the pronunciation, that is really not correct, but he was, for example, a servant of the other famous, maybe the most important Spanish painter of the time, or maybe of all of the time, Diego Velázquez. So Juan de Pareja was his servant. And he started to learn how to paint, of course, observing Velázquez. And then he became an important painter. Another story is
And do we know how he arrived in Europe? And
he
where
didn't
he was
arrive.
from?
Probably was a son of someone who were African and probably was a mixed race. And he was born in Andalusia in southern Spain. Another similar story is the story of one Latino, that he was basically the page of one of the most important son of an important duke. So one of the tasks as a page and a servant of his son was to go with the kid at school. And so going to school,
sure he doesn't skip his classes.
Yeah, and he started to learn everything, Latin or whatever. So the Duke was so surprised by his skills that really decided to give him the opportunity to have an higher education at the time. And then he became a professor at the University of Granada. Other stories are connected, for example, to a Catholic saint called Benedict de Moor from Sicily. And actually, he was born too in Sicily by African
Slaves.
enslaved parents. So sometimes the shades of those who arrived, other people arrived, by the way, also as not servant and sometimes also they arrived no, not as diplomats or merchant. Maybe they were independent travelers, or sometimes they were like maybe the Europeans were doing when they were doing journey in Asia or Africa, through falsifying documents or saying that I'm coming on behalf of this duke. Or so there was, for example, a character. His name is Saga Crestos, that he came to Italy from Ethiopia, but he was able, for example, to go in very close to Addis Ababa to an important Catholic priest. Saying that he was one of the nephew of the king of Ethiopia. So basically, this Catholic priest gave him a letter to go to the Vatican State that confirmed that he was a part of the dynasty of Ethiopia. And so from this moment...
So the Solomonic dynasty of the Solomonic kings.
From this moment, he was very young. He was 19, Saga Crestos. From this moment, he was able basically to have credit in every important state, because once he was at the Vatican State, that also they say, this is the Vatican States introduced him to the Doge of Venice, and so he traveled to Venice. At this point, every dynasty in Europe want to meet him because they believe that he was one of the part of so I think there are several different stories of different Africans with different roles and intention who were in Europe. So not only servant, and also the servant or the slaves, because in some kingdom, especially in not only in Italy, I think probably also in Portugal or in Spain, you can, in one sense, at the time, buy your freedom too. So not all the servants who were servant or came as servant
as slaves
or slaves, they stay slaves for the entire life.
Yes.
So this is another important point, especially in this time, in this frame of the time. Then, of course, a lot of things change some decades later, because this also can told us different story of emancipation, also through labor and exploitation sometimes of their skills. And we don't know exactly what could happen to someone who was able to buy his freedom, probably because he was really smart to conduct a business.
Very skilled.
And probably the second or third generation was much more better.
So this is an important point that you make in the film. It also explains how this very visible African presence in Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries gradually becomes invisible and forgotten, because you're showing in the documentary that if they are freed, or their children who are born as free and not as slaves, although in some places like Sicily, the children of slaves would have also been born as slaves. They would remain enslaved, even though they were born in Europe. But in other places, they would be freed, as baptized as Catholic and freed, and so eventually integrated into the society, and not developing the kind of intergenerational, collective, communal identity that is common in other African diasporas of former slaves, such as the Caribbean or in the Americas. So this is a major difference. We don't have this memory, but what you are actually showing in the film is that many Europeans today are probably at some point of African descent that is perhaps no longer visible, but was surely there because there were so many Africans. And this is a very thought-provoking conclusion that you reach in the movie, also by showing the different artworks from different museums in Europe, in which Black Africans are visible in different places as gondoliers in Venice, as people in the streets in Lisbon, and just decorating ceilings and frescoes in Mantua and in other places. And assuming there were so many Africans in Europe at that time, one is prompt to ask what happened to their memory. How come today people are talking about African presence in Europe as something that is foreign or strange to European identity? And what you're actually showing in this film is that European identity was from at least the 15th century entangled to African identities, and one could add also to Asian identities, Middle Eastern identities. So it is impossible to accept this myth of autochthonic white identity of Europeans, and this is a very, very important point that you're making in the film. But I want to maybe push you on one point, because you told us about a few of the better known figures that feature in your film, and they're all men. But we do know that most of the Africans who arrived in Europe, who lived in Europe in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries, were actually women. So what can you tell us about them?
Yeah, from what I basically use in the documentary through the interview, there were a lot of presence of African women, especially in Europe, in this moment. Of course, then there is a huge presence also in South America, and their basically roles. Most of them were inside the household, so they were servant in a lot of important families.
So, of course, they didn't arrive as diplomats. They could not freely travel. So if they arrived as slaves, and then sometimes later became servants. But their arrival was as domestic
even
slaves,
of course
mostly.
the same route and journey to also sometimes by their freedom, sometimes being freed by some people, because there are some reports, for example, in Venice, of an important person in Venice that in his testament he said, okay, and I would like that this person and this, and technically were 3 African women, will be free. And you have to give them an amount of money. So, of course, there are several different stories of these
domestic slaves who were freed.
Slaves, yeah. And then there are stories that probably are not captured of those who were also or born free, or their parents change status. Or their parents were mixed race. So there are probably a lot of stories connected to this world. So, yeah.
Of women. And I thought it was interesting in the film that in order to highlight this presence of African women as enslaved domestic servants, and either enslaved or free, you used reenactments actually of actors who are playing their roles, sometimes also taking your lead from or the inspiration from existing artworks, such as Velázquez, the one by Velázquez on the Maid and the Supper at Emmaus, which is a very famous painting showing an African maid servant, and we don't know if she was free or still enslaved. But and you're trying to still shed light on their lives, which I think is very important. And I wanted to ask you two final questions. And one would be, how did making this film differ from your work on your earlier films that all dealt with the more recent past? So either with mostly with the 20th century. So in the history of Italian film, or in the history of the Second World War, or in the history of immigration in Italy in the early 21st century. And with this, with We Were Here, you go back to the Renaissance. It's a much earlier period, different challenges, maybe different perspective for a contemporary artist and filmmaker and an activist such as yourself. So if you could maybe tell us a little bit about...
Yeah, sure. First of all, I was really happy to navigate into this kind of, it's a sort of time machine. So having the opportunity to tell things about different times. It was not something that I programmed, because also my first documentary about African American in Second World War came by chance, because at the time I was working for a film called Miracle at Sant'Anna. It's a beautiful film directed by Spike Lee about black soldiers during Second World War in Italy, and I was working in this film as a set assistant. And only after the release of this film, I decided why I don't do a documentary about this story, but a real documentary interviewing the real veterans. And for example, now I'm able to understand that there are a lot of similarity, because also the story of black soldiers in Second World War is a story that was not totally ignored, but was in one sense told in a different shades, because I grew up in Europe, and I remember that there are several films made, of course, in the United States about Second World War, and sometimes there are black soldiers, but they are only driving jeep or giving chocolate to the kids. So
they're not fighting, they're not doing the liberation from the Nazis.
I was seeing these images, but really didn't understand the real impact about, and it's the same in the Renaissance. I could not say that I never seen any images. Probably I see a lot of images in the art painting, because I, of course, lived in Italy. I went in a lot of museum. I walk on the street, in the street.
Art, yes.
But there is any structure that is telling you, wait, this presence is not only so minimal, or there is I'm not talking about the numbers, I'm talking also about the roles, about the story behind that. So for me, doing this work about the Renaissance was really important, because was remarking again the relation between the visible and the invisible, not only because is there or is not there. Sometimes is there, but is our mind that is programmed to don't see subject that are there. And so for me was a great also lessons, because starting We Were Here, after 3-4 months that I was doing this work, even in each city that I was in Europe, especially Southern Europe, I was trying to find details in the street name that maybe can remember or remark to a black presence. So
can you give us one example for this? Street names?
Yeah. Every time that I was in a city, I try, for example, to see if it was really true, and there was a connection in a street called, of course, in Italia is Neri, or
so the Via de Neri, the Street of the Blacks.
The Street of the Black, because actually in Italy we have a lot of name of this street. Of course, many times are not connected to an African presence. In some cases, yes. But when I grew up in Italy, I never thought that this was. So doing this documentary, I start to apply this concept everywhere. If I was in Seville, if I was, because, maybe there is, because sometimes, and this was really helpful because when I start to apply this concept and start to reading books about the city and blah, 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 and of course matching the work of historian in many cases, like for example in Lisbon there are a couple of streets called the Rua dos Pocos Negros, because this was the real street where African people gathering at the time. So I say, oh wow, this you can apply this concept, by the way, with every ethnicity at the time or everything, but it's something that for us is discounted, that we don't really pay attention. And
the Via dei Neri in Florence is very central, but I never thought to look into how this might relate to the history of African presence in Florence. And I should add that when I remember very well that when I took my first course as a student in the history, art history of the Renaissance, so the history of Renaissance art, one of the my favorite paintings painters is Andrea Mantegna, and then there is this very famous oculus from the Camera degli Sposi, the ceiling that shows a beautiful face of a white woman, and next to her a beautiful African woman, and the textbook said, Mantegna painted the white and the black just to emphasize the white and to show his virtuosity. So there was no, not even an afterthought about the possibility that here was a depiction of that reflects a social reality, that there really were. And we now know, based on the research conducted in recent decades, we know there were Black Africans in the court of Mantua and in the court of Ferrara that was very close. So this is something that I think has changed, especially in American textbooks on Renaissance art. But in Europe, it is still not as acknowledged as it is in definitely in the US. So
and also I think it's not sometimes a problem of ignorance. Sometimes it's a problem of how can I say? A lot of think about art history, and also how to read a painting. Sometimes came decades or centuries after the painting has been made. Just think about it, the title of a painting.
Of course.
So maybe there was an intention at the time in the 15th, 16th century to give a title to a painting. So also the title came with the different mindset that came centuries later about race relation or everything.
Of course.
And this created a huge influence in our way to view a painting or to read an essay or to write an essay. And many details of the entire story sometimes are hidden for us, because sometimes we also could not imagine the behind the scene of a painting in which maybe there is a black subject that even is a servant, probably it's not enslaved in the same way how they were enslaved in some other part of the world. And we don't know what happened also 5 minutes after this painting is finished, because maybe he's not only the servant, maybe he's the real favorite person that maybe the Duke is telling secret to him or whatever. So
and we also know that a Duke like Alessandro de' Medici was probably of mixed...
and we don't know the exact story also about this is of course works with every, I think, female, not only, but maybe even there were servants. We don't know if sometimes we knew that there were a lot of relation and sometimes sex abuse, but sometimes there were also relation. And there were secret relation, so we don't know the exact moment that happens when the paint is finished, and the before and the after.
Yes. Sadly, it is hard to imagine relations in the sense that we are thinking of today, when these were such relations of dependence and power relations that the women really did not have a choice. They could not refuse if they were considered the property of the owners. But this is a topic for another conversation. So we will just finish by one last question about your next project. What do you have in mind for your next project?
Yeah, it's very difficult because I tend to have a lot of ideas and in different, of course, fields, not only in the documentary, but I'm really focused on a couple of projects that I just starting. One is about Ghana, West Africa, and is about these codes called Adinkra codes that are symbol who basically are telling the meanings of different things like the universe, strength. Each symbol has a different meanings to tell something about the life of not only West Africa. By the way, in each country of Africa, maybe they have their own symbols. But the Adinkra codes are really used in a lot of things like object, textile. So I'm trying to work on a feature documentary, but also video installations, so to separate things. And the other, it's probably the develop of the work of the story of Benedict Demure, because
that you mentioned earlier on.
Yeah. With this documentary, we were here. Maybe I challenge also the presumption of the Black presence into the Renaissance society. But with the story of Benedict Demure, I would like also to challenge, even I'm not a huge an expert of Catholicism, but I would like to challenge this idea that, of course, there are also saint with an African
Benedict Demure, Benedetto of Palermo, Benedetto il Moro, was eventually canonized. He was recognized as a saint, as he still is venerated today as a canonized saint of the entire
venerated
Catholic
also
Church.
Not only in Palermo, but in South America.
In Brazil is very strong.
In Brazil, in New York, I didn't know there are a couple of churches dedicated to him, and of course in the United States there are other churches. So for me, this is because basically with my work, it's not that I want to challenge in a negative way. It's just to do some remind, because unfortunately, history nowadays, the representation of the history of the past nowadays, it's like sometimes the food or other things of culture. We believe that things that we are eating now came only from our town. Maybe in the last century we invented that. We tend to forget the long process of influence, contribution, inspiration, and evolution of something that we assume that is like we see now, and we thought that was always like the same. So through my work, sometimes I like to challenge in this way, because I like, by the way, bringing together the different shades and contribution of humanity in different situations, especially in a world that was really, culturally speaking, important, that is the Mediterranean world. So North Africa, Middle East, South Europe. It's a huge, important hub of culture that probably influenced and inspired a lot of cultures. But when, for example, in Europe, the Northern Europe standard became the dominant standard, we assume that everything that is European, or everything that is African, or everything that is Middle Eastern is only one brand. Mm-hmm. And we forget that basically
it's all entangled.
All the three, they have a huge, important foundation into the moment in which all they were entangled. Yes.
Thank you. And I finish by thanking Fred Kudjo Kuwornu. Thank you for this conversation. And I hope you enjoy your time in Tel Aviv and this visit to Israel. And I'll see you soon.
Tel Aviv 360, Israel's largest and most diverse podcast.